Week before Christmas, my mother called to remind me to bring the green bean casserole. That was the whole call. 45 seconds. No, how are you? No, we miss you. Just the casserole. And maybe that should have told me everything I needed to know about how that dinner was going to go. I drove the 2.5 hours from Chicago to my parents' house in Rockford, with the dish sitting on the passenger seat, still warm, wrapped in a dish towel my grandmother had given me. I remember thinking that was ironic later. My grandmother was the one who had started Whitfield & Sons Catering, the family business that was supposedly being passed down to the next generation. Except that generation, according to my family, didn't include me. Let me back up. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old. I have a degree in hospitality management from DePaul, a second degree in business administration, and 5 years of experience working in operations for a regional food service company before I went out on my own. I am, by any reasonable measure, exactly the person you would want running a catering business. My brother Owen is 37. He has a degree in marketing, which he has told everyone about at every holiday dinner for the past 15 years, and exactly 0 years of experience in food service, operations, logistics, or anything remotely connected to what it actually takes to run a catering company. He is charming, loud, and our father's favorite. That last part is the only one that ever seemed to matter. My sister Jess is 29. She went to cosmetology school, which is a perfectly respectable thing to do. Except she spent the last 6 years telling anyone who would listen that she was going to go back and finish her business degree, eventually. She never did. She also married Owen's college roommate, which somehow elevated her status in the family to co-heir a parent. I never fully understood the logic there, but the Thompson family has never been particularly interested in logic. Whitfield & Sons. Yes, Sons, even though my grandmother had no sons and the name came from her maiden name, had been running for 31 years. My grandmother built it from a church potluck side hustle into a legitimate operation that did weddings, corporate events, hospital fundraisers, university galas. By the time she handed it to my parents, it was pulling in about $1.2 million a year in revenue. Not a Fortune 500 company, but real. Solid. Something to be proud of. My mother had managed the client relationships for 20 years. My father had managed the finances and the staff. When my grandmother passed 4 years ago, she left the business equally to both of them with the understanding, stated in a letter she left with her attorney, that it should eventually pass to the child most prepared to carry it forward. That letter was not a legal document. My father made sure I understood that the one time I brought it up. I had been working inside the business unofficially since I was 14, helping with setup at events on weekends. I went to DePaul specifically because I wanted the credentials to take over one day. During my years at the food service company, I was learning distribution, vendor contracts, kitchen logistics, everything that the catering world actually runs on. I came back and pitched my parents a 5-year modernization plan, new booking software, a restructured staffing model, a corporate account outreach strategy, the summer before that Christmas. My father listened politely. Then he told me the business was doing fine and that I should give it time. Owen had never worked a single shift. I should have read that signal more clearly. I did read it, honestly. I just didn't want to believe it meant what it meant. I pulled into my parents' driveway at 4 in the afternoon on December 23rd. The house was decorated the way it always was. Fake icicle lights along the gutters. The ceramic nativity scene my mother had bought at a craft fair in 1994. The wreath on the door that had seen better decades. I sat in the car for a moment before going in. Something felt different. I couldn't name it yet. Owen's truck was already there. Jess's car was parked behind it. My parents' neighbor's SUV was in the street, which was odd. We didn't usually have outside guests at the family pre-Christmas dinner. Inside, the house smelled like my mother's pot roast and something else underneath it, something tense. You know how a room can feel before anything has actually been said? That was the room. My mother hugged me at the door. It was the kind of hug that has a schedule. Quick, pat on the back, release. Claire, good, you made it. Put the casserole in the oven on 250. My father was in the living room with Owen, Jess, and 2 people I didn't recognize. A man in a gray sport coat, late 50s, and a woman next to him with a leather portfolio on her lap. My father introduced them as business contacts. First names only, Frank and Susan. He said it casually. The way you say something when you're hoping nobody asks a follow-up question. I said hello. I took the casserole to the kitchen. I stood at the counter for a minute and breathed. Dinner was fine on the surface. My mother's pot roast. Owen made a joke about my drive that wasn't quite a joke. Jess talked about the renovation she and her husband were doing on their kitchen. My father talked about a Packers game. Frank and Susan were pleasant in that practiced way people are when they are there for professional reasons and are trying not to show it. After dinner, my father asked everyone to stay at the table. He said he had an announcement. I watched Owen look at Jess and Jess look at Owen, and they both looked at my father. Nobody looked at me. My father stood up. He said that he and my mother had been thinking for a long time about the future of the business. He said they weren't getting any younger. He laughed when he said that, and Owen laughed with him, and that they had decided it was time to start planning the transition. I sat up a little. This was it. This was the conversation I had been waiting for, working toward. I had my proposal updated on my laptop in my bag. I had numbers, projections, a vendor consolidation strategy that would reduce overhead by 18% in the first year. I was ready. My father said they had decided to sell. I heard the word but. It took a second to land. He said they had found a buyer, a regional hospitality group based out of Indianapolis called Cornerstone Group, and that the deal was valued at $2.8 million. He said Frank was the acquisition lead for Cornerstone. He said it was a good deal, a fair deal, and that he and my mother were proud of what they'd built and felt good knowing it was going to solid hands. He said Owen would be staying on in a brand ambassador capacity during the transition period. He said there was a bonus in it for Jess for helping coordinate the handover on the client side. He did not mention me. The table was quiet for a moment. My mother was looking at her plate. I said, "What about me?" My father looked at me. Not unkindly, actually. That was almost worse. He said, "Claire, you have your career. You've built something on your own. You don't need this." He said it like it was a compliment, like he had done me a favor. Owen said, "Yeah, you're doing great, Claire. You've always been the independent one." I remember the exact feeling in my chest when he said that. Not anger, not right away. It was something quieter and colder than anger. It was the feeling of having something confirmed that you had been hoping wasn't true. I asked when the deal was closing. My father said January 15th. He said contracts were already drafted. He said Frank's team had been doing due diligence for 2 months. 2 months. They had been doing this for 2 months and no one had said a word to me. My mother finally looked up from her plate. She said, "We just thought it was the cleanest solution, honey." Cleanest. That was the word she used. I said I needed some air. I got my coat. I walked out to the backyard where my grandmother used to grow tomatoes in the summer, and I stood there in the cold for a few minutes looking at the dirt. Then I went back inside, ate a piece of my mother's Christmas cake, said my goodbyes, and drove 2.5 hours back to Chicago. Here's something I have never told anyone in my family. 8 months before that Christmas dinner, I had started a holding company. I called it Harlow Partners. It was registered in Delaware, operating out of Illinois, and it existed for one reason. I had seen the writing on the wall with my parents' business for a long time, and I had been quietly preparing. I had spent 2 years building a client base of my own, corporate accounts, university contracts, 3 steady hospital system relationships, operating under a separate brand I'd launched called Meridian Event Group. By the time of that Christmas dinner, Meridian was doing just under $800,000 in annual revenue. I had 3 full-time staff and a network of contracted kitchen crews. Harlow Partners was the parent structure I had set up to eventually acquire assets and scale. My attorney had helped me structure it properly. I had investors, 2 angels I'd connected with through a DePaul alumni network, and a credit line I'd established through a regional commercial bank. I had been watching the regional catering market in northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin for 18 months. I had a list of acquisition targets. Whitfield & Sons was on that list, not for sentimental reasons, for market reasons. The client roster, the venue relationships, the name recognition in the Rockford corridor. It was exactly the kind of established infrastructure that would take Meridian years to build organically. I had not approached my parents about buying the business, because I had assumed, wrongly, I know now, that the transition conversation would happen first, and I would have a seat at that table. When I drove home from Rockford that night, I was not thinking about revenge. I want to be clear about that because I think people assume that's the story. It wasn't. I was thinking about the business. I was thinking about 31 years of my grandmother's work, about the employees who'd been with the company for over a decade, about the corporate clients who didn't know they were about to be handed to an Indianapolis holding group that would homogenize everything my grandmother had built. I called my attorney from the car. I said I needed to know everything about Cornerstone Group. What my attorney found in the next 3 days was not complicated, but it was important. Cornerstone Group was real and legitimate, but they were mid-acquisition overextended. They had closed on 2 other regional catering operations in the past 14 months and were carrying significant debt on both. The $2.8 million offer to my parents was structured with $1.1 million up front and the remainder in a seller-financed note over 5 years, meaning my parents would be waiting on $1.7 million from a company that was already stretched. More importantly, Cornerstone had not yet secured their financing for the upfront portion. The deal had a January 15th close date, but as of late December, Frank's team was still working on the capital stack. The deal could fall through, and even if it didn't, my parents didn't fully understand what they'd agreed to. I didn't feel good about what I was going to do. I want to say that clearly. It wasn't a clean feeling, but I also kept coming back to my grandmother's letter. The one that wasn't legally binding, the one my father had dismissed, and the part where she said, "The child most prepared to carry it forward." I called Frank. I introduced myself as a principal at Harlow Partners. I said I understood he was under contract with Whitfield & Sons on an exclusive basis, but that I wanted to introduce myself in case circumstances changed. I asked if he'd be willing to have a conversation. He was guarded, but he took the call. That told me something. Over the next 2 weeks, through proper legal channels and with full transparency to both sides, I made an offer on Whitfield & Sons directly to my parents through Harlow Partners. My offer was $3.1 million, all cash, 30-day close. I structured the cash position using my credit line, the angel capital, and a small business acquisition loan I had pre-qualified for in November. My attorney and my financial advisor had run the numbers. It was aggressive but executable. My parents' attorney called my attorney. The question, as relayed to me, was, "Who is Harlow Partners?" My attorney said, correctly, that Harlow Partners was a private holding company and that the principal's identity would be disclosed at closing per standard terms. Cornerstone's financing, as it turned out, fell through on January 8th. Frank called my parents' attorney on a Thursday afternoon and asked for a 30-day extension. My parents' attorney, to his credit, told them to consider all their options. My mother called me that evening. She said the Cornerstone deal had hit a snag. She asked if I knew anything about a company called Harlow. She said it almost like a question she didn't want the answer to. I said I'd come to Rockford on Saturday. I sat across from both my parents at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten that Christmas cake 3 weeks earlier, and I told them everything. I told them about Meridian Event Group. I told them about Harlow Partners. I told them about Harlow Partners. I told them about the offer. My father was quiet for a long time. My mother kept looking between me and the table. I walked them through the financing. I showed them the term sheet. I explained why the Cornerstone deal was a risk they didn't fully understand. The seller financing, the overextension, the integration model Cornerstone used that typically resulted in significant staff cuts and client churn within 18 months. I told them my offer would close in 30 days, all cash. I told them I would retain all current staff. I told them the Whitfield name would stay on the brand. My father said, "Why didn't you just come to us?" And I said, "Dad, I did. Last summer. You told me the business was doing fine and to give it time." He didn't have an answer for that. My mother started crying. Not loudly, just quietly, in the way she does when she knows she's wrong but isn't ready to say it yet. I told them I wasn't doing this to punish anyone. I told them I was doing it because the business deserved to survive, and the people who worked there deserved stability, and because 31 years of my grandmother's work mattered to me even if the transition plan hadn't included me. My father signed the letter of intent that afternoon. The closing happened on February 3rd. It was not dramatic. There was no moment where I stood in a room and revealed myself to a shocked audience. It was me, my attorney, my parents' attorney, a notary, and a stack of documents. My mother had baked muffins and left them in a tin by the door. I don't know why that detail has stayed with me, but it has. Owen called me the week after closing. He said he'd heard what happened. He said it was a lot to process. He asked if there was still a place for him in the brand ambassador role. I said I'd think about it. I didn't call him back for 2 weeks. When I did, I told him there was no brand ambassador role, but that I was hiring a sales coordinator for the corporate accounts division, and that if he wanted to submit a resume like anyone else, he was welcome to. He has not spoken to me since. I don't lose sleep over it. My father called me about a month after the closing. He didn't apologize exactly. He said he was proud of me, which I think was the closest he knew how to get. He said my grandmother would have liked how it turned out. I said I thought so too. My mother and I have a different relationship now. Not fixed. Not what I might have wanted when I was younger. But honest in a way it wasn't before. She told me once, a few months after everything, that she had known the Cornerstone deal was wrong, but that my father had pushed for it and she hadn't known how to push back. I didn't say anything when she told me that, but I heard it. Whitfield & Sons, operating under Meridian's parent structure, finished its first full year under my ownership at $1.6 million in revenue, a 33% increase over the prior year. We retained every single long-term staff member. We brought in 4 new corporate contracts in the Rockford and Chicago markets. We upgraded the kitchen facility, moved to a new booking and inventory system, and I finally implemented the vendor consolidation strategy I had pitched to my father 18 months earlier. The 18% overhead reduction I projected? We hit 21. My grandmother had a framed quote on the wall of her kitchen. I don't remember exactly when I memorized it, but I have. It said, "The table you set says more about who you are than the one you were given." When we renovated the Whitfield operations space, I had that quote put on the wall in the break room. I think about her a lot when I'm in that building. I think she'd have something sharp and funny to say about all of it. She was that kind of woman. I'm not telling this story because I want anyone to feel sorry for me. I don't need that. I'm telling it because I spent a long time believing that the seat at the table had to be given to me. It took being shut out completely to understand that I was always capable of building my own. The table my grandmother left behind was worth fighting for. But the one I built, that one's mine. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently, and honestly, not much. Not because I'm proud of every moment. There were nights I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, whether I was letting hurt feelings drive a business decision, whether I had become someone my grandmother wouldn't recognize. Those questions kept me up more than once. But here's what I kept coming back to. I had done everything right, for years, and it hadn't mattered. Not because I wasn't capable, because I wasn't the favorite. And at some point you have to reckon with the fact that waiting for people to see you clearly, people who have already decided who you are, is not a strategy. It's just hope wearing a business suit. What happened with my family wasn't an accident. My father didn't overlook me once. He overlooked me consistently in pattern over time. He chose Owen for reasons that had nothing to do with Owen's ability and everything to do with who my father wanted to be seen as. That's not cruelty exactly. It's something sadder. A person so attached to a version of the story that they can't see the facts sitting right in front of them. I was a fact my father kept misreading. And the thing about that is, you can't fix it by being more qualified. I learned that the hard way. You can show up with the credentials, the plan, the numbers, and still be invisible to someone who isn't looking. The only answer eventually is to stop auditioning for a role that was never going to be yours and go build something they can't ignore. That's what I did. Not perfectly. Not without fear. I remember the night I signed the term sheet for the acquisition loan and sat in my car in a parking garage for 20 minutes, just breathing. I wasn't sure it was going to work. I was sure it was the right thing to do. Intelligence without action is just self-comfort. I had spent years being the smart one in the room and going home empty-handed. The moment things changed was the moment I stopped waiting for permission and started making moves. The business knowledge, the financial structure, the network I'd built, none of it mattered until I used it. And using it required a kind of courage that had nothing to do with being fearless. It was more like being tired enough of the alternative. My grandmother built Whitfield & Sons from nothing. She didn't wait for someone to hand it to her. She set up tables in church basements and made food that was good enough that people kept calling back. That's the whole story, really. Show up. Do the work. Be good enough that they can't pretend you don't exist. Owen got to watch from the sidelines. Jess moved on. My father eventually said he was proud of me, and I believed him, and I also understood that his pride came 30 years later than it should have. The business is mine now. The name on the wall is my grandmother's. The decisions are mine. That's not revenge. That's just what happens when you stop asking for a seat and build your own table. I think she'd like that.